The gods of Theros are impressive constructs of ideas, aspects of the very nature of the plane. They command great power and weave spells of magic not known by any mortal, planeswalker, or otherwise. And all of this is complemented by a physical representation of that power, wielded by the gods, weapons forged from the starry sky of Nyx itself. Each god in the pantheon of Theros holds such a weapon, if only to strike fear or awe into the mortals who worship them. From the impossibly long shadowy whip of Erebos, god of the dead, or the stolen bident of Thalia, god of the seas, your own signature weapon is all the rage for the gods on Theros. Even in this arsenal of godly arms, there's one that stands above the others, that which is wielded by the most prominent god on Theros, Heliod, god of the sun. With his mighty sun spear, Heliod commands the devotion of followers and fellow gods alike. But what do we know about this mighty weapon? This is what the cards don't tell us about the shadow of the sun spear, Krusor. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Ether Hub. I'm Simon, bringing you more Magic the Gathering lore. With Theros Beyond Death, we're learning a lot about the nature of gods on Theros, namely the true intent and demeanor of Heliod, god of the sun, and the self-proclaimed greatest god in the pantheon. Crucial to the story of Beyond Death and the plane of Theros as a whole is Heliod's own weapon, Krusor the Sun Spear. Let's see how this mysterious weapon has evolved to become an important equipment responsible for the fall of Heliod. The first mention of Heliod's weapon actually comes well before the original story from our first trip to Theros. It ties into the origins of one Gideon Jorah, who was known as Kithian Iora on his home plane. As a young kid who performed selfless heroic deeds to protect his home of Akros, Heliod recognized this young warrior's potential and made Kithian his champion. Representing the god of the sun, Heliod gave his champion the Sun Spear, Krusor, and set him onto a task to kill an avatar of death, a minion of Heliod's foe, Erebos, the god of death. Using the spear, Kithian killed this avatar, but took it a step further and tried to kill Erebos, a god, at the same time. As powerful as Krusor is, it couldn't harm Erebos, who swatted it away like a fly. This is where we first see Krusor in the lore, but it wouldn't be the last. Still, we learned a lot about weapons wielded by gods just from this one example. Krusor, like other weapons in the Pantheon, are crafted by the gods and can be used to manipulate the mortal world beneath them, but they can't be used on fellow gods. They cannot be used to cause any type of real harm to another god, thus protecting the balance of Nyx, lest they devolve into warring savages. Still, there was one god who figured out a way to craft a god-killing weapon, Purphoros, the god of the forge, and he used this blade in a great war between the gods of Theros. Now, in the story of the original Theros set, we find the Planeswalker Elspeth Tirel discovering the plane and witnessing a fight between Heliod and Purphoros, during which a godly sword falls from the sky and lands right next to her. Many believe this to be Heliod's weapon, Krusor, but now we know it's actually a sword named Godsend, the sword forged by Purphoros that can cut the very fabric of the gods. This weapon would go on to be the trusted sword of Elspeth, as she used it to cut down the false god Xenagos in the original story. But I wanted to be clear that this was a completely different weapon to Heliod's spear, Krusor. Krusor stayed in the hands of Heliod throughout the entire story of Theros, even up to the epic conclusion in which the god of the sun witnessed his champion slay the usurper Xenagos with Godsend. As Krusor would not actually harm a god, it was up to Elspeth to bring down the god of revels with this, now her most iconic of weapons. But why was Krusor important at all? If it wasn't the blade that downed Xenagos, then what made it such a feared weapon in the Pantheon? It's true that all the gods' original weapons couldn't do real lasting harm to other gods directly, but they could be used to disrupt the mortals who worshipped and are devoted to that god. As devotion from mortals directly fuels the power of Nyx and the gods they believe in, hindering their belief or straight up just killing them can indirectly weaken or even hurt the stability of a god. This is something Heliod knew and used to great effectiveness as the most powerful god in Nyx, and Krusor was instrumental in this power play. The Sun Spear had the ability to strike anywhere on Theros, any place Heliod desired, even deep beneath the plane's surface to the realm of the dead, the Underworld. No one would be safe from Heliod's wrath, and wrath Heliod had plenty of. If a people did not properly worship the sun and the god who provided it, they would be smote by Crusaor. Should a city disrespect Heliod with inadequate sacrifices, Crusaor's light would pierce the clouds and level it from king to peasant. In a way, no other god wished to upset Heliod because of this impressive ability to strike at any polis that may be devoted to them. Crusaor was a deterrent, a threat none could take lightly. Tales even go back to a great coastal city, a polis of Thassa and Perforos, who didn't praise the bringer of light. With Crusaor in hand, Heliod brought low the city and all its people crashing beneath the waves. This city was known as Eryximethis, now lost, always a reminder of the great power wielded in Crusaor. Now, this turned out to be, in truth, a misleading legend. Heliod didn't destroy Eryximethis, rather the city was built upon the back of a giant kraken who one day, after hundreds of years of sleeping, decided to dive deep into the sea, meaning this was possibly the worst place ever to build a city. Still, the story of Crusaor's power stuck, and fear was the result. This leads us to the story in Theros Beyond Death, and the appearance of Shadow Spear, a legendary weapon wielded by Elspeth Tirel in her epic escape from the Underworld. But what is the Shadow Spear? How did she get it, and why does it look so much like a dark, twisted version of Crusaor? The Shadow Spear first shows up in the Beyond Death storyline as Elspeth is trying to enjoy her post-life existence in Elysium, basically a paradise realm within the Underworld reserved for those who died as heroes. Despite Elspeth being in this perfect state of being, her version of Elysium was tainted and corrupted by nightmarish, vivid dreams of her torturous past. It was as if her memories refused to let her find peace. In reality though, the dream-weaving nightmare mage, Ashiok, a planeswalker in her own right, was mentally assaulting Elspeth, feeding off the agony of her particularly troublesome memories. One reoccurring nightmare brought her back to her final moments of life, the event which put her in the Underworld, the betrayal of Heliod. Heliod feared Elspeth and her planeswalking abilities. He feared she could challenge him much like the planeswalker Xenagos did. So even with Elspeth as his champion, completing such a great deed in his name and saving the Pantheon, Heliod used Godsend to kill Elspeth Tirel. And with Ashiok manipulating her thoughts in the afterlife, our hero relives this betrayal over and over again. Ashiok, for those who don't know, is a powerful mage of mysterious origins, but is unmatched in the field of nightmare magic. They can construct living, breathing monstrosities tailor-fit to those they deem to torture. They delight in the agony experienced by others, and at the moment on Theros, a plane uniquely respondent to this form of magic, Elspeth's plights are just too exquisite to let up. Yet, as a consequence of being so proficient in this skill, Ashiok accidentally gave Elspeth the tool she needed to escape her fate. As Elspeth is tormented with her death over and over, each time the nightmare feels more real, the pain is greater, and she can even feel the breath of Heliod down her neck, smell the sweat on her brow. The nightmare is spilling into the physical world. Finally, the visions do in fact become reality, and Elspeth is able to reach out and grab the shadowy, twisted version of Heliod's own weapon, Crusaor, and take it from the god of her nightmares. Awaking from a fear like none other, Elspeth now holds that instrument of torture in her hands. It's with her in the Underworld, a shadowy copy of the weapon of the sun, a weapon she dons, Shadow Spear. Now on the plane of Theros, there are two Crusaors, the one of light wielded by Heliod, and its dark sister in the hands of Elspeth. Ashiok in this Shadow Spear would go on to be the ultimate downfall of Heliod. While the Shadow Spear could prove no real challenge to a god, one thing that could is belief itself. Using the Shadow Spear, Elspeth cut down countless foes in her escape of the Underworld, a story we'll cover in another video, but this weapon would be her most trusted companion in her march from death. Knowing that belief on Theros means everything, even the difference between a powerful god and non-existence, Elspeth began to scream out to everyone who could listen to her. Dead, living, it didn't matter. She held Shadowspear high, proclaiming it to be the real Crusaor, the real godly weapon of Heliod, and that the one wielded by the Sun God was in fact an imposter. A bold statement many would claim to be preposterous. But if you say a lie with enough conviction and repeatedly, it eventually becomes true. On Theros, there's no better place to see this phenomenon in action. The Shadowspear was a weapon of darkness wielded by a warrior of light. It was that which killed and tortured Elspeth for her entire stay in the Underworld, but which also ultimately proved to be her greatest weapon in her fight for freedom and justice. Not to mention, this is just one of the coolest cards in the set. So much flavor, making creatures vulnerable again, fitting so perfectly with the story example of bringing even a god like Heliod low and humbled. Devotion is a powerful force on Theros. The Shadowspear Crusaor, as an example, shows how it could work both ways. As more and more people encountered Elspeth and began to believe that she wielded the true Crusaor, belief in the weapon that Heliod was wielding started to wane. As she ventured through the pits of the Underworld, breaking to the surface, she was met by Heliod himself. The god of the sun refused to let this enemy free into the world. An epic confrontation was about to unfold. But just like any great prize fight, confidence, momentum, and the crowd go a long way in shifting the outcome. The people of Theros, above and below in the Underworld, believed that Elspeth wielded the true Crusaor. So, as the two weapons clashed for the first time, the true Crusaor, the one wielded by Heliod, began to bend and break, eventually shattering into a million pieces. The light of the weapon dimmed. Shadowspear had succeeded. It may have been a lie, but to everyone else, it seemed to be the truth, and with this fight, the real Crusaor shattered and broken, Shadowspear was Crusaor. Ultimately, Heliod's fate would be decided by his fellow gods on Theros, his punishment fit for the demeanor of an arrogant god. We'll go into the full story of Theros where we'll explain more about his punishment, but it's easy to say that the Shadowspear and the conviction of Elspeth manipulated the belief system on Theros and overthrew the strongest god in the Pantheon. But that's gonna do it for today's video, guys. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to leave it a like, comment, subscribe, and of course, click that notification bell so you never miss out on a new video. As always, thank you all so much for watching, and until next time, see ya!